Hello world, I am Curtis Simpson and this is the Jectives typography news. Today is July 3rd, 2025, and that means the Typographics 2025 conference is officially over. So I thought today we would go and do a recap of all of the things that were publicly available that were free, so that you can go back and check out what might be interesting to you. There were a ton of workshops and things like that going on. I'm not going to cover any of that because I didn't go to New York. I didn't go see those. But I'll go ahead and show you those on like the schedule so you can see what they were. Maybe at some point these people will repeat the workshops and things like that. I think these are pretty common. They're expensive. These hosts, they set these things up, and I think that they'll probably come back. Let me go ahead and turn on my screen. There's me. So this is the Typographics website, 2025. And we'll go back to the schedule here. So I covered this on, I think probably the very first day that this was going on because we talked about Jupiter to Japan. And I'll go ahead and add that one to the description as well. I've added links to this in the description for like the highlights. But it's basically like day one, day two, Dear Amelia, and then the TypeLab presentations. So you can see here, there's workshops, things like that going on. There were TypeLab streaming events going on. And then the big days were Friday, June 27th and Saturday, June 28th. These were all day, and it was the conference. The TypeLabs were going on like all day on 5 other days, but these weren't necessarily like the main events. The two conference days were the main events, so that's what I'm really going to be covering. But like I said, the workshops on here, this comprised because it went from July 30th or June 23rd to July 3rd. So a lot of that was workshops, and there was a festival where you could go buy books and things like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff on here to go check out. 3D typography in Blender. They had walking tours. They had tours at like museums and things like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff on here to check out. But since I didn't go to any of these workshops, since I didn't go check any of this out, I'm not going to really cover this. And you can see some of the stuff was free. Like you could walk through the cemetery. That was free. But some of these other events were $300, $500, $600. So it can get pretty pricey. But if that's what you're into, learning directly is always a great way to do it. Let's get out of the schedule and let's talk about TypeLab. Let me go ahead and switch to the face cam. I originally mentioned the TypeLab presentations, and I said I was kind of disappointed by the first day of the Americas one because I thought that at least some of it would be in English and it was all in Spanish. But I don't know why I switched. Let's go ahead and go back. But if you go to the TypeLab Americas by Typographics, they have a YouTube channel just for this. And you do have to go to the live section, similar to like these typography news. They used to be pre-recorded and they used to go into my videos. Now they're only in my live section. So if you go to TypeLab Americas, and you're just at the home section, you're gonna think that there are no videos here to watch. Go to the live tab and you'll see there are 3 full streams on here. And I guess I could point out now, I'm gonna try to burn through this as fast as I can because there are, I don't know, hundreds of speakers to go through, at least like 100 speakers to go through. I'm not gonna mention all of them, obviously, but if we were to try to go through, there are 3 days on here. They're each 6 to 8 hours. We have another 2 days of Type Asia, and then there was Type Europe, but they don't have their stuff posted. Basically, there's a ton of speakers, a ton of content, and I am just going to try and point out what I thought to be highlights and give you like the objective, like here's what happened on the other side of it. So I'll objectively point out, what was going on. Then I'll give my subjective opinions on what I thought was the coolest. But I'm not going to cover the TypeLabs because I only popped in and out of them. I didn't watch all 8 hours of each of these streams. But like I said, the very first day, TypeLabs America 1 was in Spanish. So If you speak Spanish, that's awesome for you. I took Spanish in high school. I'm not fluent in Spanish. I did watch some of it just to like look at it, but you can only get so much out of that. So day 1 of TypeLab Americas Spanish, day 2 and day 5. These were in New York and they are in English. And you can go back and watch these right now. I don't know that they'll stay on there forever. I don't see any reason they would remove them, but you know, people do funny things. TypeLab Asia. When I mentioned this before, I said I wasn't sure if this was going to be in English or if it was going to be in, you know, Chinese, Japanese, Korean. I didn't know what language they were going to be in. Lucky for English speakers, they're both in English. So I popped in and watched some of those. TypeLab Asia from June 27th, June 28th. These are both in English as well. I did see a little bit of one day of TypeLab Europe, but they don't have theirs posted on here, which is pretty disappointing. But maybe they'll get added at a later point. They were live streamed, and when you do a live stream, you can basically check a box that says like, let people watch a replay or not. So TypeLab Europe didn't, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't add it later. So maybe go check that out. Like I said, all 3 of these are linked in the description. So I'm not going to go into detail on these, but basically they were like Zoom calls that ended up getting published as live streams. Go check those out. Those are cool, but let's go to the main event, which is the Typographics 2025 conference. Similar situation here. You have to go to, like, if you go here, you're just going to get videos and, you know, their top videos from 2018. You look at it, you don't see anything from 2025, right? You got to go to the live tab. Go to live tab. You can see the last 4 years on here. They only have day 1 from 2022. I didn't watch that, so I'm not sure. Maybe there was only one day. Kind of doubt it, but maybe there was. So you can see the past 4 years on here, but what we're interested in are day 1 and day 2. Let me go ahead and mute this so none of that audio ends up playing. But I'm going to go through what I thought were the highlights for me. And I'm not expecting that these will all resonate with you. And I'm not expecting, please don't expect me to like fully explain everything that's going on. But hopefully I can plant some seeds. We've talked about this before. If you've watched my book reviews, I talk about planting seeds. And hopefully I can kind of point you in a few different directions and maybe some of them will resonate and then you can go check them out on your own. I'm not going to cover every speaker that spoke at this one, but I'm going to make a note in the beginning here because this was asked and answered in the chat. I'll read exactly what Typographics wrote. They said the unedited live stream will be available to replay here for the short term, and then later each talk will be edited and published on our website and Vimeo channels. And then they linked those in the chat. I don't know. I'm kind of assuming that this is just going to be left up forever since the last 4 years are on there. And then they'll just turn these into clips and then you could watch like the clips individually as they get posted if you wanted. Right now, that's not up. Right now, the only thing that's up are these full live streams. So hopefully this doesn't get taken down because I do kind of like watching the whole thing. One note to make real quick is that in the beginning of day 1, the audio was terrible for like the first few minutes. It was recording both the microphone and then also like the room audio. So there was a weird echo. It got pointed out in chat and then got fixed pretty quick. The next thing I'll point out before we actually get into this is Occupant Fonts Tick. This is the font that you're going to see right here that they used for their main branding this year. I just bring this up because it was asked in chat when the live stream was starting. Someone asked what the font was, so maybe one of you will be wondering what this font was. Occupant Fonts, they were one of the, I'm not sure if they were necessarily one of the sponsors. Maybe they just got promotion. Maybe it was like a, oh gosh, what do you even call it? Maybe like bartered and they were like, hey, you can use our font if you give us the promo. I'm not sure. Or maybe they were paid and then paid Typographics to like also sponsor the conference. But you can try this font. So you can just go and get the trial font it's only going to be these characters right here. So it's just like a limited uppercase, lowercase number. So you can kind of get a feel for it, but you're not actually going to be able to do much with it. Also, you know, trials are never to be used for anything, not even like personal stuff. So always pay for them. But if you want to test it out and see how it works, I downloaded it, threw it into Affinity, and it's cool. It works fine. Tick also comes with a counterpart called Talk. So Tick is cooler in my opinion, but maybe Talk is more your speed. You know, they're both clearly like these stencil type typefaces. But it's kind of cool that there is like Tick and Talk. Talk's not used for this, but I just thought I would point it out anyway. Let's get into the actual speakers. I'm gonna just give a few call outs on this one. Let's see if I can get these to open. Okay, we gotta click on them. I was trying to do middle clicks. Let's just click on these. Hopefully we're gonna have to pause every single one of them. So I'm just gonna point out a few things that I liked from Leo Porto and Gabriella Carnabucci. I'm probably saying that wrong. I apologize. I'm probably gonna say a lot of names wrong. Probably gonna get some pronouns wrong. I'm doing my best here. So they talked about type as brand, and I just wanted to point out a few of their clients' works that they talked about. The W was pretty cool. W Hotels. We had one of these in Las Vegas. I can't remember if it's still there or not. The hotel changed a few times. I think it is still there. But you can see they're talking about how they couldn't really do much with the actual W because it's so iconic and it's so huge on the side of these buildings. Like the cost to change that just, it wouldn't be worth it. It's already got brand presence. It's already on the side of all of these giant iconic hotels. Let me fast forward a little bit. But what I thought was cool was the way that they played with the type outside of this. So they already had this W. They turned it into a full typeface. Just gonna fast forward. It looks very much, you know, like a lot of Swiss typefaces. You know, it basically looks like Futura or Universe or yeah, basically like Futura if we're being honest. But it is a custom typeface. They're calling it W Supreme. But what I wanted to point out was how it works in context, because I think that's really what makes typefaces make more sense. So this is how they're using it. You know, they're doing W and then the name of the city. But then I'll just let this play out. They've got some of their touch points. You can see it all looks really nice. And then they talked about how it scaled. You know, we've got it on the side of the building, and then you've got it all the way down to business cards and things like that. Twitch, I found this one to be really interesting. They Twitch already had a typeface called Rupert, which existed before. Gosh, I should have written down. Oh wait, it's right here. Display. Display created the original Rupert, and Twitch was using it, but these two created a version along with Display just for Twitch. And I thought it was really cool because it had a lot of open type features that could create these buttons and the logos and things like that on their own. These are the two speakers right here. Let me see if I can fast forward a little bit. See, you can watch right here. You can kind of see it in action. So they're using open type features to kind of create these pill shapes and to put the Twitch logo in here. They can just type it like that. Boom, there it goes. Super efficient, very, you know, awesome for a project like this. And then they kind of talk about how the typeface, let me go ahead and pause this. You can see those pill shapes at the bottom there. So they're not only using it for buttons, it's going throughout the entire branding. And then even when they get to signage and stuff like this, so they have it for TwitchCon. So they can use it to create like the icons for wayfinding. I think they have like a big sign coming up. Oh, okay. So they used it for like this big inflatable type pill-shaped icon. And I just thought it was really cool, very type driven. And it just demonstrates two things, I guess. One, how big typography is, to how important it is to like branding, and then two, how the technology of current typography can really improve the workflow and things like that. We looked at a comic book font in one of the recent episodes. It was called Pranza. And they could do like the speech bubbles. It was really cool. So I think that this is another demonstration of basically that, where you're using Rupert, but then creating a custom version of it for Twitch that can do these really cool and very useful things. Not just like things that are cool, but that are actually useful in real life. They also did the typography for Nike in the Paris Olympics. And I thought this one was worth pointing out. I'll let you watch it. Because you can see right now this typography is stretching, but they're basically breaking all of the rules that you learn in Type 101. And Type 101, you learn like, don't stretch, sorry, the microphone's right here. Don't stretch the typefaces. Don't stretch them out, don't stretch them up, because basically what it does, if I play and pause this real quick, oops. What it does is the parts that should be a certain contrast, it breaks that. And so it stretches out how the typeface was designed. If you, let's go back to that previous section. So if you're looking at this and you're stretching it, this up here where it says Siphon, I guess that's Siphon, I'm not sure. It's not designed like a typeface would be designed, where all of the weights of the different horizontal and vertical and sizes like make sense. When you're stretching it out, the crossbar of like the A is going to get really thick when it shouldn't be, and then the sides are going to be comparatively thin. So this isn't like what you would want to do for a typeface in general, like usually. But these animations that they created for Nike, for these Paris 2020, oh no, not Paris 2024, Paris, whenever it was in Paris Olympics recently, it really does showcase what you can do if you understand the rules, because then you can break them. And they went on to talk about how Nike is basically still using this typography. And I don't know. I think that was really cool. I'm going to have to move faster through a lot of this stuff, because we're going to be here all night if, if I don't. That was the first presenter. Let's switch back. And let's get into, I wanted to point out Nat Piper here. The presentation they did was called, I forget what it was called. I should have left the schedule up here. I apologize. Do we have it? I think I have my description here. Nope. Let me go ahead and type this. Here it is. It was called, I'm not sure if this is what the presentation was or not, but this is what this project is called. It's called A Queer Year of Love Letters. And basically they went through and pointed out, I think there's 8 different ones, 8 different people who this person that Nat created typefaces about. Yeah, here's the schedule. Let's see what it was called real quick. Nat Piper, Alphabets Against Erasure. That's what it was. So Alphabets Against Erasure. Basically, the concept was to create these typefaces. I'll just go ahead and click on one. To create these typefaces that would pay homage and kind of encapsulate these different characters, and they're real people, but these different people in history that Nat found to be important. And create typefaces about them, and kind of create what they described as, like, I don't remember if it was a time capsule, time machine. Let's just look at the description here, and that'll be probably a little bit easier. All the pop-ups though. This is on librarystack.org. I don't have this linked in the description, but if you go and watch the presentation, Nat gives the title here, or you can just look at the top of the screen, librarystack.org. / Queer Year of Love Letters. I'll go ahead and read this paragraph here. It says, I'm using these fonts as time machines. These time machines take me back to Robert Ford and black, gay, and lesbian underground publishing in the early 1990s, Chicago, to Lesbian Alliance, a socialist feminist enclave in 1970, St. Louis, Missouri. You get the idea. It says, In use, these fonts engage the past as provocation. They engage the past as a verb. Whether or not you are interested in this subject, if you're interested in these people, I don't necessarily know that that matters. If you are, here's something to go look at. If you're not, I do still think that it's inspirational and interesting, this idea of like capturing something that you care about, putting it into a font file, and then, you know, putting that out into the world. All of these that are on here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so there's like 12 of them now. All 12 of these typefaces that are on here are still open font licensed. So anybody can download these. No one's, you know, making any money off these, presumably. It's literally done for the love of these people, this history, and typography. So I think it's a really cool project, and I think that it does sort of plant a seed for if you ever want to design a typeface or just any project, but specifically a font. If you want to design a font, doing it about something that you care deeply about and packaging it into this typeface that can live in like a very small footprint because font files aren't big, and that can kind of like live on and have a life beyond the life of these people or beyond the life of a magazine or a time period or, you know, whatever it is. I just thought that was a really cool concept by Nat Piper. Sophie Bayer, this was just kind of a spotlight that was thrown into the conference. They had a few of these between speakers, and she didn't actually come to the conference or anything, but she had this sort of pre-recorded thing, and she just talked about 3 main points real quick, and I thought it was really cool. If I can get some pictures on here. She talked about dyslexia and legibility and some of the misconceptions or bad information that's been put out there, and pointed out that these like dyslexic typefaces, while there might be anecdotal evidence for that these help some people, the studies show that it doesn't actually help. So any of these that are being marketed that way, it's mostly marketing, according to her. What there's a subsection of dyslexic people who can read better, for lack of a better word, can read better if there's more spacing between the letters. And everybody has had that sort of crowding of letters before where it's difficult to read what's going on. And she also talks about like what's easier to read between serifs, sans serifs. But it's just a few minutes of the presentation. It's around the 2-hour and 32-minute mark is what I'm at right now. So if you want to go check that out, I thought that was interesting. Another one of these spotlights was from Poster House. Let me see if I can actually, I won't pull up the actual part of the video, but it was from Esperanza Humphrey. And she talked about these subway posters that were put up when the subways first launched in New York. And I thought it was really cool, but I thought that the Poster House in general was cool. I was not familiar with this. I'll go ahead and let this little video play for a second so you can get an idea of what's going on and I can get a drink. But I'm not from New York. I don't spend a lot of time in New York. So I've never been to the Poster House, but I thought that this was really cool. These exhibits and things like that, you know, it looks really cool. Turn on these controls so we can turn this off. But just another seed to plant, I guess. It's something that I wrote down to come back to and look at. It looks like the exhibitions are changing all the time. If you wanted to go see the one that she was talking about, From Bronx to the Battery, it is going on until November 2nd of this year. Next up, Jeffrey Gibson. Again, I'm not going to go through like everything that he spoke about, but he was talking about creating this alphabet right here. And basically the reason he did that was because he was creating, let me see if I can find one of them real quick. We'll just see. So he was creating these like woven tapestries, and creating this artwork and using typography inside of it. And somebody asked him, like, why are you using, let me see if I can get the quote exact. I think I wrote it down right. Why are you using somebody else's font? Is this a history that you want to bring into your work? I'm pretty good personally about separating art from artist. And if I want to use a font by Eric Gill, I'll just use it. I know some people have problems with using fonts by certain people, listening to music by certain people once they know things about them personally. For me, that's not the biggest deal. If I want to enjoy art, I will. But I do think it's an interesting question, especially if it contradicts with what your work is about. So I thought that it was a really interesting point to just kind of, from Jeffrey Gibson, to be conscious of the history that you're putting into your current project with the typefaces that you're using. So that could be two different things, in my opinion, right off the bat. First, the history of that typeface in terms of the type designer. So like I mentioned, Eric Gill. Oh, I didn't realize this was still playing. So this was the typeface that he created. So that might be like the person themselves and be like, oh, this person sucks. I don't want to include them in my work because I don't want that to be associated with me or this project or whatever. The other thing would be to understand the historical context of the typefaces used. So not even just the person who designed it or their original intent, but how it was used throughout history. So maybe you're designing something and you're really wanting to promote one cause, but this typeface had been used historically for another cause, and that might be contradicting. And there might be some use case for that in general. You know, sometimes there is that, what's the word for it? There is that situation where you want to sort of twist something. I can't think of, I really wish the juxtaposition, is that the right word? The juxtaposition of like using something that was previously used to like represent the opposite, you kind of like reclaiming it or changing the meaning of it. That can be cool sometimes. I think most situations you're not necessarily going to have the power to do that. Like I don't think anybody's going to rebrand the swastika anytime soon. Maybe people didn't think that they could do that the first time. But like when it comes to typefaces, if something is heavily for cause A, I don't think you're going to get it to switch in the mind of the consumer or the voter or whoever it is to be associated with cause B. So the point is to just kind of be aware of the historical significance and then ask yourself, like, do I want this to be a part of what I'm making right now? Elizabeth Goodspeed, she was the closing speaker for this. I'll go ahead and let her reel play. She was the closing speaker, and as any good closing act should be, I do think that she was the highlight of the day, and I think the same applies to the next day. This is some of her work, which I guess lends credibility. But what she really spoke about was, let's go ahead and just open up her website, I guess. What she really spoke about was the casual archivist. And let's just go ahead and watch a little bit of this. I'm not going to put the audio on, but here's the casual archivist. Gosh, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Archivist. But basically she went through and she was talking about how we use references today and how we get these ideas from references. And she's talking about how references are being used perhaps in like, I don't necessarily know that they're being used in the wrong way, but she points out that they're being used in a way that doesn't necessarily expand on anything. They don't pay homage. They don't sort of like take inspiration. It's literally just a copy and then changing the words on it. So she's got some examples here of where like this style is being borrowed and used to kind of imbue it with a certain feeling, right? These fruit labels and then this apple brandy. Makes sense, looks great. That's a good example. But then she goes on to talk about, let's see how quickly YouTube can, there she is right there. She talks about Sabrina Carpenter, how she thinks that this is a good advertisement for her tour. and it's going back to like the 70s, and it really borrows from that aesthetic. But you can see the pictures are clearly different. It's not a one-to-one copy. But she goes on to talk about some that are just like straight up one-to-one copies, and they don't necessarily do anything. Like, they don't borrow from this to help make sense of that. They just look the same. And there's some even more blatant ones right here. Like this one was one that she pointed out as one that she thought wasn't great. This was a Marc Jacobs ad next to the 13 movie poster. And you can see what is the sort of like, we're so far away from the fruit label where it was like this sort of like period or this archetype of labels and logos that kind of was reinterpreted as something new. And now we're just like, let's copy it so that like the joke is that you understand exactly what this is a copy of, but it really doesn't mean anything beyond that. And she goes on to kind of point out, this is like the meme. She goes on to point out like, that's not necessarily like super helpful. And she talks about how when you look at the actual archived works, you know, you might think of this Garamond and just like looks like this, and people, this has kind of become like a cliche of what the 80s advertisements looked like. But then she pulls up some of the real ones, and you are missing out on like the big blocks of typography at the bottom, the big blocks of text at the bottom, the logos. Like, if you're going to take from these other things, it's important to like understand what you're actually taking from and not just copy the aesthetic for the sake of copying the aesthetic that somebody can point out like, hey, this looks exactly like the movie poster from 30 years ago or whatever. So I won't go into everything. She does a much better job of presenting this concept than I do. But I think it's really cool to check out. And then also, she leaves us with this spreadsheet. It's just a Google spreadsheet, and it's got tons of archives, and she's got each little tab labeled on here. I didn't include this, but if you go watch her presentation, it is bit.ly, you know, like bit.ly, how the shortened links. It's bit.ly/casual archivist, and it'll take you to this Google spreadsheet. But she's got ephemera, single topics, publications, corporations, like movies, just tons of archives to kind of go through and get inspiration and get a better feel for these. The last thing I'll say, and this is something she pointed out, is that all of these are amazing to go and look at online or in a book. And for most of us and for most situations, that's all we're ever going to be able to do. But if you're working on like a really important project, or you really want to get a feel for what these things were like, let's say for like the magazine ads, holding that magazine in your hand, flipping through the actual pages, like seeing it in context. Hey dude, first time seeing you. Hi Meowski. Sorry for anybody that's watching this. I'm getting like one of my rare chats on here. Potential topics. Yeah. Meowski, I will, I'll try to find you and we can talk later. But if you really wanted to like understand like the context of these and really do a good job of paying homage and like not being the person that just copies it one-to-one, you need to go look at like the physical objects. And I know sometimes that can be difficult, but there are museums, there are archives, there are places that can be done. So if you can, that's always going to be the best possible option. The closing roundtable, I don't think there's any reason to switch to it. I'll just talk. In the closing roundtable, basically at lunch break and then at the end of the day, so they do 4 of these, I guess, total, on 2 different days. GL, we are talking about the Typographics conference. I'm talking about the presenters right now. At the end of the closing roundtable, or at the end of the presentations, at the end of the day, before lunch break, they would sit down with all the speakers and kind of ask a question. Sometimes it was kind of awkward and cringe, but sometimes it was interesting and good. And one thing I thought was interesting, one takeaway from the first day, was from Wael Morkos. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but he was talking about how humans are mimetic beings. Like, we were just talking about taking inspiration from these archives and stuff. And so basically his concept was like, from the beginning, we were single cells. I don't have an Instagram, but go ahead and put yours in there and I'll come find you. I think it might be Jectives Official, something like that. I don't use it, but I can find you on there. Go ahead and put yours on there. This idea of like, from the beginning, we are like these little single cells that like replicate. You know, everybody's seen like a baby growing inside, right? You've seen those videos. And so this idea of these cells replicating, and then what makes humans interesting, what makes evolution interesting, are like the mutations. And the mutations are what make things interesting. So they're talking about inspiration, they're talking about copying other people, this types of stuff. What makes it interesting is like taking inspiration from something and then like mutating it and making it into something of your own, like something new. And I just thought that that was like a perfect close to the day and a perfect sort of conversation to have after Elizabeth gave her presentation. Like I said, Elizabeth's presentation was great. Let me go ahead and switch back to my screen cap. Elizabeth Goodspeed, hers was great. If you want to leave this and go watch that, that's fine. And then I thought Alan Bell's was great. I thought Matt Willie's was really great. And then another one we're going to get to was Dear Amelia, which was really great. So if you're watching this in the replay, or if you're watching this live and you're like on board, go look in the description and then go find these people, because those were sort of like my top presentations. Let's go ahead and go to day 2 though. Alan Bell, I thought that he was really, I'll go ahead and let this play for a second. I'm not sure how much we're going to see on screen. Let me skip to a more fun part. Alan Bell was a super interesting presenter, and I thought that he was particularly interesting to see in context with some of these younger presenters, because he's, you know, you can see him right here. He's an older gentleman. He sometimes when you see younger presenters, even someone like me speaking, there's a certain level of confidence and a certain level of like credibility. You know, you've done things, maybe you're a good designer, maybe you're even a great designer, but there's just a different level of like, I don't even know, confidence and I don't know, just like swagger that comes from a seasoned pro like Alan Bell. This is a guy who was using like setting metal type, you know, hand setting metal type for publications and things like that. He started like one of the first gay newspapers, and it was called it Gays Week, got sued by Newsweek. And he won the case. He created BLK magazine. He was doing these movie titles. Let me see if I can get to one. He was doing these movie credits, and he did one for one of the Star Trek. Did one for one of the Star Trek movies. And before him, basically movie titles were just thrown in, you know, with Helvetica or something like that. Like the typeface didn't matter. I'll go ahead and let this play. The studios cared about it so little that they would just go send it off to someone else like him. He didn't work for the movie studio. He worked for a different agency. I can't remember who he worked for now. He worked for a different agency at the time. They would just send it off to some third party and be like, hey, here's all the credits. Put it on, you know, type it out so that we can show it at the end of the film. And he was essentially, in his words, like the first person, maybe one of the first people, but like the first person to ask like, well, what typeface are you using for the movie, like the title credits? And he kind of points out that they're just kind of like, why? Like, why do you care? Like, just type it out, guy. But he was one of the first people that were like, okay, I might as well typeset this in the font that they're using for the actual like opening credits that they're using for the branding in the movie so that it feels cohesive. And he points out that these motion picture associations at the end here, when you get to this point here, he would put all of these in the font that was used for the movies. Even like the number here, this 266, I'm pointing at my screen as if you can see that. This 26694 here, these numbers would typically just be set in whatever the default typeface was. But all of the ones that he did, he would typeset in the font that was used for like the title credits, that was used for the end screen credits. And I don't know, I just think it was really cool. I feel like this is another one of those sort of like seeds, like I keep talking about, to like come back to. Alan Bell just seems like a super cool guy, super genuine. And there's just a difference between someone like this who has like a ton of life experience and a ton of experience in design over decades and decades and decades. Someone that was, hand setting metal type, that was there in the beginning of InDesign, that just has, was starting some of the first newspapers for these niche, audiences. That was just kind of like a pioneer. That's the best word that I think we can use here for Alan Bell. These people that are pioneers, or that have just have, decades of experience, are just on another level. So I do think he was one of the best presenters on here. Let's go ahead and move forward. This is Talia Cotton. She did a presentation called Taming Chaos. And I won't speak on a lot of it, but I think that she works a lot with technology and kind of animating typography, or doing generative designs and things like that. And she pointed out that while these things, they help us in certain ways, and they can speed up processes and make things look cool, and there's all these ways that technology can help us. But she points out, her case is that you surrender something to these mechanisms. So for her, she's pointing out 5 different ones here. For interactive design, she's saying you're surrendering to the user, because with interactive design, you have to, you don't know what the user is going to do, and you have to design around that. For generative design, you're surrendering to random values. You're never going to get exactly what you would if you were to choose each of those random points that have been created. Data driven, you're giving up to evolving data. You don't know what the data is going to be in the future. Adaptable design, you're giving up to the user, because they could resize the window for your browser, right? Automated design, it says the unfathomable. I'm not sure, I don't remember what that was. I think she was talking about sort of like if you let the machine sort of create on its own, like you don't necessarily know what's going to come in the end of that. And I think all of these, oh my gosh, I don't have the screen on. Here they are. I'm just going to leave myself off the screen so that you can see these all the time. Okay, cool, cool, Meowski. I'll check it. Thanks. So she's pointing out that you're surrendering something to each of these. And I think I have a video about AI coming up, but I think with all of the conversations about AI and design and art, and it's going to be involved in typography as well, I do think we have to question, like, what are we surrendering to these models when we do that? Like, what are we giving up? I don't know necessarily, we'd have to look at specific models, whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing. But I do think it's important just to recognize that we are sort of like surrendering something with each of these pieces of technology. In particular, I think right now AI is, one of those big things to look at. So she's got a whole presentation. This is just one little piece that I've taken out of it. Robin Canner, gosh, I think it's Canner. Um, she did a whole presentation, just super impressive clients and things like that. She worked with the Biden campaign in 20, what year was that? 2020, 2019, I guess, for the 2020 campaign. Um, and I just wanted to point this out. I don't actually think the typography was like incredible in that campaign, and you can kind of see part of it up here where like, um, let's get to that in a second. The campaign was basically about, there was a big portion of it about trust. Like, who do I trust? Do I trust Trump? Do I trust Biden? Do I trust some other candidate? And one of the reasons that they chose the typefaces they did for Biden, according to Robin, is that these were trustworthy typefaces. So they chose Mercury that had been used in print and magazines and stuff. And she says that this is as true as the written word. I think the opposite of that would be like somebody could point out like the written word isn't necessarily true just because it's written, but that was their logic behind it. And then Mercury was a typeface designed from wristwatches. It was designed based on the numbers from wristwatches, the typography found in wristwatches. So it was kind of like the truth in, like the reality of time, things like that. So I thought it was cool, even if whether you agree or not, I do think it's cool to like to examine the context of typefaces and where you're choosing them and like what you want it to be, because whether that ever is interpreted by the end user, like whether voters ever were like, oh yeah, I trust him because these fonts are trustworthy. I don't, who knows whether that was the case or not. But I think the fact that there was purpose behind it and there was some sort of effort and meaning does sort of, it does make some kind of difference, even if it's small. And, like, what's the alternative? The alternative is just using like some random font that like looks good. I don't know. I think having design is about doing stuff for a reason. Art is about doing whatever you want. So I think when you're designing, when you're using typefaces, similar to how we talked about before with the archival stuff from Elizabeth Goodspeed, I think having purpose for the typefaces that you're choosing. Oh no, it wasn't Elizabeth. It was Jeffrey Gibbons. How we talked about like the history of typefaces before. I think that it was interesting. Here's like an actual case study of like a presidential campaign that actually won, doing exactly what we talked about, where like choosing typefaces for very specific reasons, looking at the historical context of these fonts, and then, being successful based on that. And it could be cherry picked. I'm sure there are bad examples where, it didn't necessarily matter. Let me skip through a few more of these that she talks about here. I'll probably have to pause each and every one of these. Let me pause real quick. And pause. Okay. I pointed out that I liked what she was doing with, or at least the logic behind the Joe Biden one. We get to the Democrats one, and she's rebranding for it, and I honestly think these are pretty mid. I don't know, and I do think this is sort of a point at which I can talk about. One thing I don't particularly love about this conference is that it is only speaking to half the country. Everybody in the world uses typography, and this is very a one-sided. And if you're on that one side, I'm sure that you're just like eating it up and it's great for you. If you're not, I think that you're immediately not going to watch this. And I think we should want everyone to enjoy typography. I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of motive here to where if you think you're on the side of good, you don't want the bad side to be interested in like good design. But I think that, I don't know. I wish some of these conferences were less about politics than it seems that they are. And the Cooper Union seems to be quite political. So, when they're on stage and they're literally cheering about one side or the other winning, it's kind of a turnoff for me, even if I agree with the sentiment of some of the things that they're talking about. But regardless of that, I just don't I don't find this to be incredibly engaging. But I found the Harvard Social Media Lab to be really cool. She's using this question mark and using it in all these cool ways. Let me see if I can skip forward. And it just really fits. It really feels like appropriate. Whereas this kind of feels a little bit like, I don't know, hello, fellow young people, or whatever that 30 Rock quote was, where it's like they're kind of getting there. You can see what they're trying to do, but I don't know. It's kind of bland. The last thing, I thought this was pretty cool. The bench. She's talking about this idea of like sandwiches and sandwiching. So she's basically like sandwiched typography in between the logo, and typically that would be something that I don't think you would do, but like we talked about before, when you know the rules, then you can kind of break them. And I thought this was kind of a cool modular concept. You know, you can see they're using completely different typefaces for the bench as well as like the words inside of it. But somehow it works. And here's a few posters. So this is for the bench. It's for like I think it was a bar, like a pub. Maybe it was some sort of place where they're hosting, I don't remember what it was. They're hosting these events. You know, this one's a vice presidential debate. That one's a game 4 watch party. But it's the same concept every time and not necessarily the same typeface every time. And you can see in the middle one there, they've even put sandwiched an eagle in between the bench. But I thought this was a cool concept worth pointing out. The closing speaker, once again, I pointed out last time Elizabeth Goodspeed was the closing speaker, and she did an excellent job, and that the closing speaker is kind of like the closing act of any festival. And I think that Matt Willey is no exception. I first came across him. I'm just going to let his reel play in the background. Hopefully it doesn't crash the stream. I first came across him when I wanted to know who created the Killing Eve titles. If you've ever watched that show, you know that like there's just really cool typography in Killing Eve, from the opening credits to every time there's a new city and they just kind of boom, like put the Barcelona or Paris or whatever it is on there. I'm going to pause this because I am worried that the stream is going to playing this is going to make my stream quality worse. But my biggest takeaway from him, I'll just point out once again, similar to Alan Bell, Matt Willey is a seasons vet. You know, I wrote down here that he went from magazines to Pentagram to title sequences. And that's how he ended up doing like the Killing Eve titles and stuff. And at the end of his presentation, he goes through a bunch of really cool sequences that he's created. But what I found most interesting about him was that he creates his own fonts, creates his own typefaces, but doesn't necessarily, he doesn't release them to the public. So he's creating these typefaces. He's not like a classically trained, like a classroom trained type designer. He just kind of does his own things and he makes mistakes, and it makes it have even more character. Go ahead and play some more of it. But you can see like he created this typeface. I don't know what magazine this is for, but he created these typefaces. He creates the typefaces for movie titles and sequences inside of movies and stuff like that. And they're real font files. They're real like they can be used. They're just not for sale to the public. But he creates these and then just uses them for the movies or the TV shows or the magazines or whatever it is that he's designing for. And what I found really cool about this was the idea that you can design type without being a type designer. Is that coming across? You can design type without your profession or your goal being to create a typeface, a font to sell on its own. So for me, I have these other projects that I'm thinking about, and I want to create branding for certain things. I can create a typeface that I don't have to make perfect for public consumption. I don't have to create 30 different weights. It doesn't have to be a variable font. It doesn't have to have every character. It just has to have the characters that I need for this project in this context. And there's something really freeing about that, because if you are familiar with the channel, I've gone through the Designing Type by Karen Chung, and I've mentioned before, like, I'm not a type designer. I'm, enthusiastic about typography. Um, but I do have these goals, these ambitions, these dreams of designing typefaces um, in some sort of context, if even just to have a better understanding of it so that I can better present the news and these topics for you guys. Um, but I feel like watching this presentation, two things. I always have two things. One, it's very difficult to watch this presentation without being inspired to create. I feel like Matt Willey and Elizabeth Goodspeed, both the closing speakers, they did just a really good job of inspiring you. You finish the day of the conference and you're just like, I need to go make something right now. Like I want to go create something. You don't have that like, oh, I kind of should, but I don't know. Or you're not, what is someone going to say about this? Maybe I won't be good at that. Like you lose all of these like worries or like, I don't know, all of these just like dragging your feet. You see this and you're inspired and you want to go do it. That's one takeaway. And I think that's the main reason you should go watch Elizabeth's speech and go watch Matt's presentation. Both these were at the end of the days for day one, day two, linked in the description. The other takeaway, and this is the biggest one for me, is just I felt like seeing the way that he designs typography, not 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 a classroom trained type designer, like I said, not creating these for public consumption. He doesn't sell the typefaces. They're not on my fonts. They're not on Adobe fonts. They're not on Google fonts. You can't get them, with a small exception I'll get to. I felt like it gives me permission to design a typeface with zero intention of ever letting anyone else use it, with no pressure of like designing something that needs to be what someone else wants or needs, and can just be a typeface, can just be a font file that I want to use, that I can use for my project, whatever that is, or just for fun. Maybe I'll design a font and never use it for anything, just because it looks cool. I do have ambitions to create Scotch Roman. Like that's my favorite type classification. I love modern fonts, but I don't think that they're super practical. Scotch Roman kind of bridges the gap between, traditional serifs and modern. It's kind of like modern font, a modern typeface that you can use in more situations. And I have wanted to create that for a while now, and it just seems like this giant mountain that I would have to climb. And seeing Matt Willey give this presentation, I felt like it gave me permission to do that without any pressure of anyone else needing to be able to use the font, like without any pressure of me having to worry about what anyone else thinks about it. Obviously everyone wants people to like the things that they make, but I don't know. I that was the biggest takeaway from this that I got. And yeah, the stuff that he was creating was really, really cool. So that was the end of day two. I'll go ahead and skip some of the other things I was going to mention. Dear Amelia, this didn't come as part of the main conference. This came as, let me see if I can zoom in on this. This is Amelia. You've probably seen this font before. Used somewhere. The Beatles' Yellow Submarine, maybe. But you've probably seen it before. Maybe you didn't know what it was. Maybe you did. This whole presentation is just like, oh gosh, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like this narrative presentation by, oh shoot, what's his name? By Tomasz Lava. Sorry, I'm probably saying it wrong. I know the S is like a SH, Tomasz. This is linked in the description as well. Go watch this if you want to take this sort of narrative journey about this typeface. Like, it's so much cooler than you would ever expect it to be. I thought I would pop in, pop out. I had other things to do on Monday, so I just thought I would pop in, see what was going on, and then go do my other stuff. I ended up sitting here for an hour watching the whole presentation. I think it's actually about 35 minutes for the real presentation. But he's writing these letters to Amelia to the font that also like later turns out to be a real person. And he's trying to find out more about this font, like who created it, what's the backstory. And I don't know that I necessarily have anything to take away from this. I don't know there's something that I can add to this conversation. I just thought it was a really cool narrative. I don't know, just a really cool story about a typeface that is completely different from everything else that I've seen about, that was in Typographics. Like I said, there was TypeLab where there was like 8-hour long live streams from a bunch of different type designers, typographers, graphic designers. There were speaker after speaker after speaker at these conferences that talked about, very specific topics and how they use typography, how they design typography, all these different things. And then you close things out on Monday with this standalone presentation from Tomasz at the Cooper Union. And he talks about this font, Amelia. And I don't want to spoil anything. Maybe I already spoiled a little bit, but I don't want to spoil anything. Trust me, this is worth like the 35 minutes to go watch. It's just a crazy story. Now I might be overhyping it. But if you think this font looks cool and you like stories about typefaces, I do think that it's worth checking out. And then you can get it on my fonts. I didn't link this. I don't have like a code or anything for this. But he talks about like the font that's on my fonts as well. But yeah, Dear Amelia, completely different from all the other presentations, but just really cool narrative sort of journey. Let me switch to the face cam before we close out today. I don't know how long we've been going. Yeah, we've been going for about an hour. I burned through that as fast as I could. I was actually originally planning to do 2 separate days, and then my internet wasn't working on Friday, and I didn't want to get like halfway through the live stream and have it fail. And then there's so many different considerations when I was recording these, just pre-recording them and then posting them. It was completely different. I didn't didn't have the opportunity to have interactions with you guys in the chat. And then also it took a lot longer because I wanted to be so perfect. But the long story short is that I wanted to do the conference. I wanted to do a specific like 2 days for each day of the conference. So I probably did go through this a little fast. But hopefully you got kind of like an overview of what was going on. And I kind of cherry picked some of my favorite pieces. There are a bunch of links in the description. I think the main takeaway is that like typography is cool. There's a lot of cool people doing stuff with it, but there's a ton of content just from this conference to go consume. Like I said, TypeLab Americas, TypeLab Asia. Hopefully we get TypeLab Europe's thrown on there. Day 1, day 2. And then you have these standalone presentations. There was from Jupiter to Japan to kind of kick things off, and then Dear Amelia to kind of close things out. Everything that I just listed is worth checking out. My highlights: Alan Bell, Elizabeth Goodspeed, Matt Willey. If you can only see 3 things, go look at those. Those are on the main conference, day 1 and day 2. But hopefully you enjoyed this. If you want me to cover more conferences, more things like this, leave a comment. If there's something else just in general you want me to cover, go ahead and leave a comment. I've mentioned this before. I have a full flip through review of the 3rd edition of Thinking with Type. So if there's something specific you want to know about that book, or know my opinion, or want me to like show you within the book, go ahead and leave a comment for that. But yeah, otherwise tomorrow we're going to kind of have more of a normal news episode where it's going to be new fonts, things that are in the industry news, stuff like that. And then following that, I have kind of like a big AI episode coming up. So if there's anything you think I should check out, anything you find interesting about AI, come subscribe so that you don't miss that live stream, and you can come throw your comments and opinions in the chat. But yeah, I think that's going to be it. So all the links are in the description. Thinking with Type review coming up very soon. I have the book. I have a new light so that hopefully it looks better. Have my microphone. So hopefully it's just a better presentation overall. That's why I've been putting that one off. And then we're going to get back to regular, daily typography news tomorrow. And then after that, I think we'll do the AI episode. So hopefully you found this interesting. Go ahead and subscribe, like, do all those things. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.